Going to the gym can be the healthiest habit you ever pick up, as long as you do it right. Carelessness and fatigue are just two factors that can cause injury when you're working out. And if you're not careful, you might never work out again. This video is going to share with you the most common dangers in the gym and, more importantly, how to avoid them. You're going to learn the most effective way to reduce your injury rate by 10%. Before the making of this video in late 2023, there was a horrific weightlifting accident caught on tape that became viral. A 33-year-old bodybuilder from Bali by the name of Justin Vicky was performing heavy back squats. He was attempting a 210-kilogram squat, about 462 pounds, when tragedy struck. With a single spotter behind him, Justin began the descent of the squat. Everything was going fine until he hit the bottom of the lift and attempted to come back up. That load proved too heavy, pinning his body in a deep squat position. He then fell back to a sitting position with his head tucked into his chest. From here, the barbell rolled across his shoulders, neck, and head, which powerfully thrust his neck forward. This resulted in his neck snapping, while the nerves to his heart and respiratory systems were compressed. Unfortunately, Justin shortly succumbed to his injuries. What made this even more tragic is that Justin was an experienced lifter who was said to be careful in the gym and preached against ego lifting. What this proves is that anything can happen in the gym to anyone. In fact, it's often experienced lifters that become complacent with safety. In general, weightlifting is a relatively safe sport when compared to other sporting activities. Overall, weightlifting has an injury rate of 1 to 2 injuries per athlete per year, or 2 to 4 injuries per 1,000 hours of training exposure. Compare this to male soccer players' experience at a rate of 8.1 every 1,000 hours. When looking at the numbers in more detail, we're able to find different variables that seem to increase the chance of injury. For example, different styles of weightlifting tend to be more susceptible to certain injuries. Strongman competitors tend to be at a significantly greater risk of bicep injuries, while Olympic weightlifters tend to have a higher propensity for knee injuries. At the same time, men are 7 times more likely to experience an injury, as well as those older than 28 years old and those who spend more than 3 hours in the gym a week. While interesting, we can't do a lot about our sex, age, the amount we train, or the sport we train. We can only keep these in the back of our minds to be more aware. The good thing is there are plenty of variables we do have control over. This video will go over those. These are the top factors that increase the chances of injuries, including habits in the gym, habits outside the gym, and general safety protocols. Paying attention to what we cover will greatly increase your chance of injury-free training this year. Where do injuries occur? One of the biggest ways to stop injuries is to know which areas are more prone. A review on injuries in weightlifting concludes, anatomical locations of injury for the weight training sports suggests that differences in exercise event load, selection, and the actual technique and body positioning in a particular exercise or event can alter the mechanical stress placed on specific anatomical locations and therefore the subsequent injury risk. As most of the general population performs more bodybuilding type styles of training, we can tell you the most common injury sites are the shoulder, the knee, and the lower back. Knowing this allows you to concentrate on specifically strengthening those areas. At the same time, you can also give them extra attention when training. Learn correct technique and use proper progression. To prevent these injuries from occurring, the first thing you need to do is to take time to learn the new movement. When you start a new exercise, use lighter weights as you learn the correct movement patterns. Once you've mastered these patterns, you can then begin to add heavier loads. Starting off with heavy weight makes using good form significantly harder and increases the chance of injury. When done consistently, it simultaneously teaches your neuromuscular system the incorrect movement. When you're ready to add weight, you do so slowly to allow both your muscles and joints to adapt. A general rule is an increase of 5 to 10 pounds for upper body movements and 10 to 20 pounds for lower body movements. Listen to your body and adjust accordingly, leaning toward the conservative side. Learn the common mistakes of a movement along with correct form. As you learn the correct form of a movement, you also learn the most common mistakes. Knowing what not to do is just as important as knowing what to do. For example, during the dumbbell shoulder press, many people bring their arms out to the side of their body, abducted and externally rotated. This causes excessive stress to build in your shoulder joint, which leads to overuse over time. This can be fixed by simply bringing your elbows in slightly. Other common issues are knees caving in during the squat or elbows flaring out during the bench press. Every exercise will have its own specific key points, and it's imperative you learn them. Use a proper warm-up. Now, let's address one of the more obvious injury prevention measures, warm-ups. A warm-up's primary job is to increase muscle and tendon suppleness to stimulate blood flow to the periphery, to increase body temperature, and to enhance free coordinated movement. They can also increase synovial fluids in the joints, a type of natural lubricant. Now, a proper warm-up includes separate parts. The first is 5 minutes of general warm-up. This is any type of cardio to get your blood pumping and increase your heart rate, such as a treadmill or cycling. If you're training your upper body, you can also think about using an assault bike or an elliptical trainer, as they work your upper body as well. Next, you want to use what's known as dynamic stretching. Dynamic stretching involves bringing a joint through a full range of motion with slight activation of the muscles. For example, butt kicks warm up the knee joint while activating the hamstrings. This will warm up the joint and the muscle in an effective manner. After your dynamic warm-up, you want to move on to your warm-up sets. Warm-up sets. Too often, we see guys too anxious to get into their lifts and start with maximal working loads for their session. Don't do this. Even after a sufficient warm-up, you're not ready to immediately start using heavy loads. This is why you need to use warm-up sets. Warm-up sets are really just a continuation of your warm-up up to your first working set, in contrast to working sets, which are the sets you're performing with your prescribed load. Warm-up sets are lighter sets that you use to build up to your working weight. For example, if you're doing 3 sets of 6 reps at 250 pounds on bench press, you may perform 3 warm-up sets, 1 set of 15 reps with just the bar, 1 set of 6 reps with 155 pounds, and 1 set of 6 reps with 205 pounds. This can vary depending on the person, the lift, and the amount of weight being used. While there haven't been studies that specifically look at the effect of warm-up sets on injuries, we do know they can improve performance, such as producing significantly more force on the bench press and back squats. Correct muscle imbalances. One of the most common causes of injuries in the gym is due to muscle imbalances. When a muscle imbalance occurs, it can throw off proper mechanics and cause the other muscles to overcompensate. This can happen anywhere, but one area of particular concern is the trapezius muscles, or the traps. The traps are the body's primary stabilizers of the scapula. They're in charge of creating a strong base for the shoulder and the arm to function. When these muscles are weak, they create a weak base, which results in overuse and pain in either the shoulder or the elbow as they become overactive to correct the imbalance. For example, case studies have shown how simply strengthening the trap muscle of patients with prolonged elbow pain has been successful at eradicating the pain. Their pain went from a score of 41 to 0. Another common fix is grip strength. Many people ignore their grip, as it's not necessarily the most glamorous muscle. However, weak extensors or flexors are a common cause of elbow pain, as it forces you to overcompensate. Realize the body operates as one long chain. Ignoring a muscle at any part of the chain will force the other locations to compensate, which will eventually lead to injury. Everyone will have their own personalized needs. However, the easiest way to solve this problem is to follow a structured program that gives equal work to all muscle groups and all major movement patterns. Add mobility training. Mobility is another term that tends to be thrown into the mix with flexibility, yet is distinctly different. The best way to think of mobility is flexibility with function. For example, being able to touch your toes requires flexibility, while holding a loaded barbell overhead and doing squats requires mobility in the shoulders and the thoracic spine. Studies show a clear relationship between adding mobility training to one's training and a reduction in injury. By maintaining high levels of mobility in all your joints, you ensure a solid base where no joint will be placed in a compromising position. Get plenty of sleep. Lifters need to sleep. Putting injuries aside for a moment, sleep is the most powerful recovery method we have. During this time, your body releases hormones and puts you in a state for optimal recovery. Missing out on sleep has been shown to increase fat storage, decrease muscle gain, and cause a deficit in performance. However, we now know that lack of sleep decreases cognitive function, including executive function, attention, learning, mental performance, and mental health. All of these can lead to injury. So, how much sleep is enough? More than you might think. Studies show that less than 7 hours of sleep on a consistent basis increases the chance of injury in athletes by 1.7 times. This risk can dramatically increase with a greater reduction in sleep. For example, multiple nights of insomnia puts athletes at a 14.6 times greater risk of concussion. These injuries can be due to decreased strength, slower reaction time, poor coordination, or general clumsiness. Further, lack of sleep generally decreases mood and increases anxiety, which can lead to poor decision-making. Now, the numbers we just spoke about were specifically speaking for athletes, which isn't exactly the same as lifting weights in the gym. However, things can still happen quickly where you need full levels of cognition. In one survey of weightlifters who were injured, a whopping 60% suggested tiredness or fatigue to be the primary cause. Being tired in the gym can easily lead to one forgetting about setting a latch or putting on a lopsided weight. These are all things most lifters have done at least once, and it's simply due to not being in the right headspace. At the same time, being overly tired leads to poor coordination, which spells trouble for some exercises, specifically the free weight movements. Nutritional concerns. Eating a balanced meal with proper calories is another effective way to mitigate injuries. Proper nutrition provides the body with nutrients it needs to support a strong body while giving it energy for optimal performance. One of the first common practices is staying in a low-caloric state for a prolonged period of time. Doing so causes dramatic changes in strength, cognitive function, and fatigue, similar to a lack of sleep. Remember, we just told you how tiredness and fatigue are the presumed cause of 60% of gym injuries. Being in a starved state only increases fatigue. At the same time, a lack of certain nutrients also increases the body's chance of experiencing an injury. For example, women are prone to eating low calories due to heightened issues with body image. They also run a higher risk of developing osteoporosis or the weakening of bone. Studies have shown these two factors combine in the weight room, placing women at an increased risk of bone stress injuries. A quick summary of other common nutrients to be mindful of are protein intake, vitamin C, D, copper, omega-3 fatty acids, or calcium for the prevention of injury to bone, muscle, tendon, and ligament health. This is a significantly more complex issue to thoroughly explore in this video, but be sure to concentrate on eating whole foods. These are simply real foods such as chicken, beef, eggs, fruits, vegetables, etc. Further, be sure to consume an adequate intake of protein of a minimum of 1.4 grams per kilogram of body weight. However, aim to hit 1.6 to 2 grams per kilogram for optimal recovery. Use deloads appropriately. While most lifters have heard of deloads, a surprising amount rarely if ever practice them. For those who aren't aware, a deload is a period of time where you decrease the work put on the muscle. Most scheduled deloads are for 5 to 7 days and occur every 4 to 6 weeks. One of the excuses many guys use to not deload is a loss of gains, as if their body will deteriorate or shrivel away if they don't hit the gym for a week. While it's a funny thought, we understand the mentality. The good thing is that while building muscle is hard, maintaining it is pretty easy. A study found performing just one set to failure per muscle group per week is enough to maintain muscle mass for 32 weeks. You're not losing gains taking a week off, and will likely come back stronger while being injury and pain-free. Therefore, if you hit the gym consistently for 6 weeks, you should seriously consider taking a week off. This allows the body time to fully recover and alleviate any buildup of fatigue. One method is to use the same program, but cut the weight by 50%. You can also spend the time concentrating on mobility or other low-intensity work. Use proper spotting. When a spotter is needed, many guys will call a random person in the gym or a friend. While this is convenient, it doesn't take long on YouTube to find plenty of spotter fail videos. That's because spotting is actually a skill that requires constant attention. For example, with a back squat, the spotter will not be able to control the weight with their hands on the bar. Therefore, the spotter should come behind the lifter and place their arms under the armpits of the lifter. If a lifter begins to fall, the spotter hoists the lifter, pulls the chest back to prevent the lifter from falling forward, and helps the lifter stand. On bench press, the spotter requires experience so they can read things such as bar speed and effort to know if a lifter is going to need help. With ultra-heavy weights, it might be even appropriate to have 3 spotters, 1 in the middle and 2 on either side of the barbell. This will allow all 3 to catch and lift the load in a balanced fashion. The point is that spotting is a skill and it needs practice. For this reason, another, perhaps better option is to use safety bars instead. These are bars that you can place at various heights in a rack that'll catch the bar if needed. For example, if doing squats, measure how far the bar goes at depth, then place the safety bars just below that. If you do miss a lift, you can simply lower the bar until the safety bars catch the barbell. This would have prevented Justin's tragedy. Consider lifting gear. One option for weightlifters is to use weightlifting gear. This can include a weightlifting belt, knee sleeves, elbow sleeves, and wrist wraps. All of these have the potential to reduce injury by different mechanisms. For example, weight belts allow a lifter to increase intra-abdominal pressure, which reduces spinal loading during lifting. Wrist wraps act as a sort of brace to maintain a solid wrist joint, and sleeves help keep a joint warm while offering some assistance. However, for those to work properly, they must be used correctly, as many general lifters are unaware of their proper use. Wrist wraps go around the wrist to minimize wrist movement. Many lifters will actually wear them below the wrist, which offers no support. Sleeves go over the joint where the main concern is a snug fit. Weight belts should be worn around your belly button and tightened as you breathe in. This allows you to press against the belt to create a greater intra-abdominal pressure with what's known as the Valsalva maneuver. This provides greater core strength and helps protect the spine. A few tips. There are a plethora of reasons why your body might hurt during exercise. However, here are 3 tips for some of the more commonly reported aches and pains. If your shoulder is prone to pain, switch to dumbbells as they allow more mobility in the shoulder compared to a barbell. Bring your elbows inward slightly during your overhead pressing to relieve pressure in your joint. During horizontal pressing, keep your elbows tucked. Also, a landmine press works great. If you're prone to elbow pain, try using a neutral grip. This takes the pressure off your extensors and extenders, which in turn relieves pressure from your elbow. If your knee already hurts, stay away from exercises that bring your knee forward. To be clear, these exercises aren't bad for your knees. However, if you do have knee pain, it can cause the pain to flare up. For example, many lifters report pain subsides by performing reverse lunges rather than lunges. You can also concentrate on concentric movements only, such as deadlifts. Continue training in this manner until your joint heals, and gradually increase the range of motion and load. As always, if something hurts, stop and never work through pain. Application. The very first thing you want to do is follow a properly structured program. If you have the resources, seriously consider buying one from a qualified coach. Before you start using heavier loads for the exercises, be sure you spend the time needed to familiarize yourself with them. Pay attention to using proper form as well. Further, be sure to include mobility work in your program. As you work through your program, use appropriate progression to increase the intensity, keeping your own personal needs in mind. A good rule is to increase the load no more than 5 to 10 pounds every week for upper body exercises and no more than 10 to 20 pounds for lower body exercises. Go even slower if you can. At home, remember to eat a diet that consists of primarily whole foods, and don't go on any extreme diets with crazy calorie deficits. If you must, for whatever reason, become accustomed to it before exerting high amounts of energy in the gym. At night, aim to get at least 7 hours of quality sleep. This could have the largest influence on injuries as it keeps your mind sharp while allowing muscles to recover better. Always be mindful of how you feel. If you're feeling especially fatigued one day, consider taking the day off. In fact, you may even need a full deload. Monitor your recovery and performance levels, and when they feel off, have a rest. When doing heavy lifts, have either a spotter or safety bar set up. If you're using a spotter, speak to them before the lift. If using safety bars, be sure they're set up appropriately. If you decide to use gear, take the time to learn how to wear it properly. A little time spent on proper usage can save you from injury later. And always, simply be mindful about what's going on around you. Anything can happen, and often you'll only have a fraction of a second to respond.